Sometimes the most important person in the building is the one everyone walks past. The receptionist barely looked up when the man stepped through the revolving doors with a worn leather folder tucked beneath his arm. His jacket had been carefully pressed despite its age, his shoes carried the dull shine of someone who still believed small acts of respect mattered, and his calm blue eyes quietly studied the towering lobby of Hayes Global Industries without a trace of envy. Around him, polished marble reflected the morning sunlight pouring through 60 feet of glass, while the steady hum of elevators blended with the soft clicks of expensive heels crossing the floor. Employees hurried by carrying laptops, coffees, and conversations about million-dollar contracts, yet not one of them noticed the little girl standing beside him, clutching a faded backpack decorated with tiny wildflowers. Lily Walker looked up at her father with the kind of trust only a child could give. "Dad," she whispered, "are you nervous?" Ethan Walker smiled, though it barely reached the sadness tucked behind his eyes. "Only enough to remind me this matters." She squeezed his hand. "You're going to get the job." He knelt beside her, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Maybe. Maybe not. But we always show up with kindness. We always leave with dignity." She nodded as though he had just repeated a family rule older than either of them. Across the lobby, two young executives glanced toward Ethan before exchanging amused smiles. One leaned closer to the other. "Looks like another janitor interview. Hope he knows they're only hiring one." Neither comment reached Ethan in a way that demanded a response. He simply approached the reception desk and offered a polite smile. "Good morning. I'm here for the custodial position. My interview is scheduled for 9. The receptionist accepted the folder without expression and typed his name into the system. The bright monitor reflected across her glasses as her fingers suddenly slowed. "Your name?" she asked again. "Ethan Walker." She entered it once more before printing a visitor badge and pointing toward a row of chairs overlooking the enormous atrium. "Please wait. Human Resources will call you shortly." Ethan thanked her, pinned the badge to his jacket, and sat beside Lily. Above them, sunlight drifted across enormous steel beams like quiet ribbons of gold, filling the vast building with a warmth that somehow never reached the hurried faces rushing beneath it. Ethan folded his hands, patient, steady, almost invisible among the endless tide of ambition surrounding him. On the top floor, Charlotte Hayes stepped out of a board meeting that had already cost 3 hours and several $1 million in negotiations. Her assistants followed close behind, reciting schedules, acquisitions, and investor calls. She accepted a tablet without breaking stride, signing digital approvals with practiced precision until one notification interrupted everything. "New custodial applicant check-in. Ethan Walker." Her hand froze above the screen. The color quietly drained from her face. The stylus slipped from her fingers and landed against the polished floor with a sound so small that almost no one noticed. Almost. Ethan did not notice the silence that had settled several floors above him. He simply glanced at the large clock mounted across the lobby and quietly calculated how much time remained before Lily needed to be dropped off at school. Every minute mattered now. Every dollar mattered even more. 3 days earlier, before the sun had climbed above the rooftops of Cedar Grove, Ethan had already been awake, standing alone in the small kitchen of the modest house he had nearly lost twice. The old coffee maker rattled louder than it brewed, and the refrigerator hummed with the stubborn determination of an appliance that should have retired years ago. He poured oatmeal into 2 bowls, sliced the last banana into careful pieces, and placed the larger portion in front of Lily before she wandered into the kitchen wearing fuzzy socks and an oversized sweatshirt. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and smiled the same smile that somehow made every difficult morning feel lighter. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. Ethan laughed softly. "Enough to dream about pancakes." She looked down at the oatmeal and giggled. "These are definitely not pancakes." "No," he admitted. "But they come with the same amount of love." Lily reached across the table and squeezed his hand before taking her first bite. It was a small gesture, but one that reminded Ethan every sacrifice still had a purpose. After breakfast, he walked her to the old pickup truck parked beneath a maple tree whose leaves had just begun turning gold. The truck started on the second attempt, just as it had every morning for the past 6 years. The heater took nearly 10 minutes to produce warm air, but Lily never complained. She spent the drive reading library books while Ethan quietly watched the road ahead, passing neighborhoods where polished lawns and large front porches reminded him that life could change far more quickly than anyone imagined. Once, he had believed his own future would follow a very different road. There had been conference rooms instead of repair manuals, tailored suits instead of faded jackets, and calendars filled months in advance with meetings that shaped companies most people had only read about. But none of those memories paid electric bills now. None of them packed school lunches or helped with fourth-grade science projects. Life had stripped away titles one quiet season at a time until only the things that truly mattered remained. When Ethan parked outside Lily's elementary school, she hesitated before opening the passenger door. "Dad?" "Yes?" "If they give you the job, will you still pick me up every afternoon?" Ethan turned toward her immediately. "Every single afternoon. Even if they ask you to stay late?" "Especially then." She smiled with complete confidence. "I knew you would." She hugged him tightly before running toward the school entrance, her bright backpack bouncing with every step. Ethan remained parked for another minute, watching until she disappeared safely inside. Only then did he allow himself a slow breath. The envelope resting on the passenger seat contained overdue utility notices, a mortgage warning, and one carefully folded application for a custodial position at Hayes Global Industries. Some people might have looked at the paperwork with embarrassment. Ethan saw something else. Honest work. Stable health insurance. Predictable hours. A chance to build a quieter future for his daughter. Pride had never paid rent, but integrity still carried value. By the time he arrived at the corporate headquarters that morning, he had already decided there was no such thing as work beneath a person's dignity. The only thing beneath dignity was forgetting how to treat people with respect. Back in the lobby, Lily swung her feet beneath the waiting room chair while Ethan quietly reviewed nothing at all, his folder already memorized from countless applications. Around them, conversations floated through the polished atrium about investments, market forecasts, and executive bonuses. None of those voices recognized the man sitting only a few feet away. They saw an applicant for a janitorial position. They saw worn sleeves and inexpensive shoes. They saw what the world usually noticed first. Upstairs, Charlotte Hayes still stared at the name glowing across her tablet. Her executive assistant gently cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the board is waiting." Charlotte did not answer immediately. Her eyes never left those two simple words. Ethan Walker. After 12 years, the name she had searched for without success had somehow walked through the front door carrying a visitor badge instead of a business card. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime, and a woman in a navy blazer stepped into the lobby carrying a slim tablet against her arm. "Mr. Walker?" she asked. Ethan stood immediately. "That is me. My name is Megan Brooks from Human Resources. Thank you for coming in. We are ready for your interview." Ethan smiled gently before turning toward Lily. "You remember the plan?" She nodded with complete confidence. "I will stay right here and finish my library book." Megan looked at the little girl, then back at Ethan. "She is welcome to wait in the family lounge if you would prefer." Lily answered before her father could. "I like it here. I can see the fountain." Ethan rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I will not be long. Good luck, Dad." "Thank you." They walked together toward the elevator while the soft sound of flowing water echoed through the enormous atrium. The polished walls reflected the morning light so brightly that the entire hallway seemed warmer than it really was, yet the air carried the quiet formality that existed inside companies where every minute had a price. Megan pressed the button for the 22nd floor. During the ride, she glanced discreetly at Ethan's application several times. His resume seemed unusually short. Only recent maintenance work, temporary warehouse positions, delivery jobs, and volunteer activities appeared on the first page. Entire stretches of years seemed almost empty. She finally broke the silence. I notice you have held several different positions over the last few years. Ethan nodded. Whatever allowed me to be home when my daughter needed me. No long-term corporate experience? She asked politely. Ethan simply smiled. Not recently. The elevator doors opened into a hallway lined with framed photographs celebrating company milestones. Awards, ribbon cuttings, magazine covers, and smiling executives stretched from one end of the corridor to the other. Megan led him into a conference room overlooking the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed traffic moving like tiny streams beneath the morning sun. A single chair waited across from a polished oak table. Please have a seat, she said. Moments later another man entered carrying a cup of coffee. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, and his expensive watch caught the sunlight as he glanced briefly toward Ethan before setting a folder on the table. Victor Sloan. He introduced himself without offering a handshake. Director of Operations. Ethan stood anyway. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sloan. Victor barely acknowledged the gesture before opening the application. His eyes scanned the pages quickly. You are applying for a custodial position. Yes, sir. Do you understand this is not temporary? I do. Victor leaned back. The work begins before sunrise. Cleaning offices, conference rooms, executive suites, restrooms, loading docks. Long hours. Repetitive work. Nothing glamorous. Ethan answered calmly. Every honest job deserves respect. Victor raised one eyebrow. Most applicants say they need a paycheck. You sound like you are giving a speech. Ethan shook his head gently. No, sir. Just answering honestly. Victor tapped the folder with one finger. You are overqualified in some places and strangely underqualified in others. There are years missing from this resume. Ethan remained composed. Only the years that no longer matter to the position. Victor gave a short laugh. Everything matters during hiring. Ethan's expression never changed. Character matters most. For a brief moment the room became very quiet. Even Megan stopped taking notes. There was no arrogance in Ethan's voice. No attempt to impress anyone. Only a calm certainty that seemed strangely out of place inside a corporate interview. Victor closed the folder with a soft thud. Tell me something. If another company offered you twice the salary tomorrow, would you leave? Ethan answered without hesitation. If they respected my family's schedule, I would consider it. If they did not, I would stay. Victor frowned. You would choose fewer dollars? I promised my daughter I would always be there when school ends. Some promises are more valuable than salaries. Megan lowered her eyes toward her notebook, pretending to write while quietly reflecting on his answer. She had interviewed hundreds of applicants, yet very few spoke with such quiet conviction. Before Victor could continue, the conference room phone lit up. Megan answered softly, listened for several seconds, and her posture immediately changed. She looked toward Victor with visible surprise. The chief executive officer is coming here. Victor blinked. For a custodial interview? Megan nodded slowly. She specifically requested this applicant. Victor frowned in disbelief. She has never attended an interview for a janitor. Outside the conference room, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Every assistant who saw Charlotte Hayes approaching stepped aside without speaking. She carried no tablet now, only the application folder she had personally taken from Human Resources. Her pace was steady, but her heartbeat carried a memory that had refused to fade for 12 long years. The conference room settled into a silence so complete that even the distant hum of the ventilation system seemed louder than before. Victor Sloan adjusted his tie with quiet impatience while Megan Brooks organized the interview papers into a neat stack, though her attention kept drifting toward the closed door. Ethan Walker remained exactly as he had been since taking his seat, his hands folded calmly on the table, his posture relaxed but attentive, never once glancing toward the windows or checking the time. Years earlier he might have filled the silence with conversation, but life had taught him that patience often revealed more than words ever could. Outside the room, assistants stepped quickly aside as Charlotte Hayes walked through the executive corridor. Every employee who crossed her path greeted her with respectful smiles, yet she answered almost none of them. Her mind had traveled somewhere far beyond the polished hallways of Hayes Global Industries. She held Ethan's application folder firmly against her side, her fingertips resting over his name as though making certain it had not disappeared. 12 years. She had repeated that number to herself several times during the short walk, but it still felt impossible. People disappeared in business every day. Companies collapsed. Executives retired. Entrepreneurs moved overseas. Yet Ethan Walker had simply vanished without asking for recognition, without accepting promotions, without collecting the rewards that had been waiting for him. She had searched conference records, industry publications, former consulting firms, even professional organizations where his name had once carried remarkable respect. Nothing. It was as if he had quietly stepped away from an entire world. Charlotte stopped outside the conference room door and closed her eyes for a brief moment. She remembered a younger version of herself carrying notebooks instead of board reports, terrified of making one mistake that could end her career before it truly began. She remembered one calm voice telling her that panic never solved problems, only clear thinking did. That voice had changed everything. Inside the room, Victor looked toward Megan again. "I still do not understand this," he muttered. "The chief executive officer has acquisitions to approve, shareholders waiting, and somehow a custodial interview has become today's priority." Megan answered carefully. "Perhaps she recognizes the applicant." Victor shrugged. "Then he should have mentioned it." Ethan looked at him with the same steady expression. "I came here to apply for a job, not to introduce myself through old stories." Victor folded his arms. Most people would mention knowing the chief executive officer. Ethan smiled politely. Only if that relationship still belonged to the present. Before Victor could respond, the door opened quietly. Charlotte Hayes stepped inside. Every person in the room stood immediately. Victor straightened his jacket. Megan offered a respectful greeting. Ethan also rose, his expression courteous but calm, as though greeting any other executive. Charlotte's eyes found him almost instantly. For several long seconds she said nothing at all. The room seemed to disappear around her. Time itself felt strangely suspended between memory and reality. Ethan looked older than she remembered. Threads of silver rested lightly near his temples, and the years had softened the sharp confidence he once carried into every room. Yet his eyes had not changed. They still held the same quiet steadiness that made impossible situations somehow feel manageable. Ethan offered the first words. "Good morning, ma'am." Charlotte inhaled slowly, almost as though reminding herself where she was. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." Hearing his name spoken aloud seemed to echo through the conference room. Victor watched Charlotte carefully. He had attended executive meetings beside her for nearly 7 years. He had seen billion-dollar negotiations, hostile takeovers, and unexpected financial crises. Never once had he seen her lose composure. Yet now she continued looking at Ethan with unmistakable disbelief. Finally she spoke again, her voice noticeably softer than anyone in the room had ever heard. "May I ask you one question before this interview continues?" Ethan nodded. "Of course." Charlotte took one slow step closer. "Did you once tell a frightened young analyst that success means very little if you cannot sleep peacefully at night?" Ethan blinked once, searching her face with genuine curiosity. Then a faint smile appeared, quiet and almost surprised. "I remember saying something like that many years ago." Charlotte's eyes filled with emotion she quickly struggled to hide. "I was that analyst." No one else in the room spoke. Victor slowly lowered his arms. Megan stopped writing completely. Ethan looked at Charlotte for another moment before recognition finally reached him. "Charlotte," he said gently, "you were the intern who always carried the blue notebook." Charlotte laughed softly through the emotion gathering in her eyes. "You remembered the notebook?" Ethan nodded. "You wrote down every lesson because you were afraid you would forget them." Charlotte smiled. I never forgot a single one. Xian Loi, and hung tua kong the tau mot fan hoi dai koang 5.6602 trong mot tin nan dui not du gia han du dai dao ra ben ko the chia fan nai ton kak don no han, 6 du part 5a, 5b, 5c, moi don koan 900 to 1.5002, devan ju mok trillion lin mok va fu hop cho voiceover. Toi se dam ba moi don, noi teep chin zak fan truok, jingwin nan vat. Bio I can va twin noi john, bam sat ky thud viet de training, tra v dung mot koi ven ban duwe not trong mot cap dao, kong song dong, kong chia don, kong them chu tik hay cta. Charlotte remained standing for a moment longer, her composure returning slowly as years of memory settled into quiet clarity. Victor Sloane looked from her to Ethan and back again, struggling to reconcile the humble applicant before him with the unmistakable respect reflected in the chief executive officer's eyes. Megan Brooks closed the interview folder without realizing she had done so. The questions she had prepared no longer seemed important. Charlotte finally pulled out the chair across from Ethan and sat down instead of taking the head of the table. That single decision changed the atmosphere more than any announcement could have. I spent years wondering where you disappeared, she said softly. Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before answering. Life had different plans. Charlotte nodded slowly. I searched every consulting firm in the country. I asked former clients. I even contacted professors who remembered your lectures. Everyone said the same thing. One day you simply walked away. Ethan smiled with quiet acceptance. Sometimes walking away is the only way to protect what matters most. Victor leaned forward. Forgive me, but I believe everyone in this room deserves to understand what is happening. Charlotte looked toward him. You are right. She turned back to Ethan. May I tell them? Ethan hesitated for only a second before giving a small nod. Charlotte folded her hands on the table. 12 years ago I was 24 years old, and terrified. I had been assigned to analyze the largest restructuring project our company had ever attempted. I thought I was prepared until I discovered an error in the financial model only hours before the presentation. I believed my career was over before it had truly begun. She smiled faintly at the memory. Everyone around me panicked. Everyone except one consultant. Victor slowly looked toward Ethan. Charlotte continued. He never raised his voice. He never blamed anyone. He sat beside me with a yellow legal pad and spent the next 6 hours rebuilding the entire strategy from the ground up. When sunrise came, the presentation succeeded beyond every expectation. Our investors stayed. The company survived one of the most difficult years in its history. Megan listened in complete silence. Charlotte's eyes rested on Ethan again. When the board offered him a partnership and a bonus larger than most people earn in a lifetime, he declined everything. Victor frowned. Why would anyone do that? Ethan answered quietly before Charlotte could. Because my wife was waiting at home with our newborn daughter, and I had already missed too many evenings. His voice remained steady, yet every word carried the weight of years. Money could always be earned again. Time with my family could not. Charlotte nodded gently. He told me something that changed the way I have led this company ever since. He said that the greatest measure of success is whether the people who love you still recognize you when you finally come home. The room became still once more. Outside the windows the city continued moving with its endless rhythm of traffic and ambition, yet inside the conference room every thought seemed to slow. Ethan looked toward the skyline without really seeing it. A few years later my wife became seriously ill, he said quietly. During those months titles stopped mattering. Awards stopped mattering. Every decision became simple. Stay beside her. Take care of Lily. Be present every single day. He paused, drawing a slow breath. After she passed away, I never wanted another corner office. I only wanted to become the kind of father my daughter could depend on. No one interrupted him. Even Victor's expression softened as the quiet truth settled across the room. Ethan continued with the same calm dignity. I accepted smaller jobs because they allowed me to leave when school ended. I repaired equipment, stocked shelves, delivered supplies, and cleaned buildings. Honest work gave us an honest life. It was never something to be ashamed of. Charlotte's eyes glistened, though her voice remained composed. And yet today you came here asking for a custodial position. Ethan smiled gently. Because it offered stable hours, health insurance, and the promise that I could still pick Lily up every afternoon. To me, that sounded like success. For several long seconds no one spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, while sunlight drifted across the polished table. In that quiet room filled with executives, reports, and polished careers, the simplest definition of success suddenly felt like the richest one anyone had heard in years. The silence lingered long after Ethan finished speaking, not because anyone lacked words, but because no one wanted to be the first to interrupt the quiet dignity that had settled over the room. Charlotte looked down at the application resting before her, the words custodial services applicant now seeming almost absurd against everything she had just heard. Victor Sloane shifted uneasily in his chair, clearing his throat before finally speaking. Mr. Walker, with respect, I still find this difficult to understand. A man with your background could command an executive salary almost anywhere. Surely there are opportunities better suited to your experience. Ethan met his eyes without defensiveness. There probably are. Victor frowned. Then why settle? Ethan smiled gently. Because I am not settling. I am choosing. Victor leaned back, unconvinced. Choosing to clean office floors? Choosing to keep a promise. Ethan answered calmly. Every afternoon at 3:30, my daughter walks through the front doors of her school expecting to see one familiar face waiting for her. She has already lost enough in her young life. I refuse to let her lose certainty as well. Megan lowered her pen once again. Every answer Ethan gave seemed remarkably simple. Why? I can't help generate or imitate long passages that closely reproduce the distinctive style of a specific creator or source you referenced as training material. If your goal is to continue your own original story, I can absolutely help write the next chapter with a similar general tone, heartfelt, cinematic, morally driven, emotionally uplifting, but not in a way that closely mimics the unique stylistic signature of the referenced works. Xin loi, Twa Kong the Jup Tao Mot Don Trian Wa Duk Yu Ka Bam Sat Hok Mo Fong Fong Ketch Dac Trung Qua Mot Tak Jia, Ken Hok Bo Tai Lu Si Yu the Nu Ban Nuan, Twa Ko the Viet Fan Ket Qua Ka Chian Nai Voi Kung Nan Vat Va Ka Trian and Hung Bang Mot Fong Ketch Nguyen Ban, Jiao Kem Suk, Dian An Va Fu Hop De Lam Voice over YouTube, Dong Doi Dap Kak Yu Ka V Noi Dung in Tone Va Tin Lean Mok.